The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Woodcraft. Just get started. Welcome to Ask TWW, where you guys ask the questions and I do my best to answer them. Today's topics include lubricating your bits, the pencils that I use in my shop, a finish for a humid climate, and round versus square dog holes. So let's dive in. Eric on YouTube asks, I noticed you sprayed something on a Forstner bit in a recent video. I've never really seen anyone use lubricant when drilling wood before. Does it leave any kind of stain? So Eric's referring to my recent book press video where I had to hog out a bunch of material for some big mortises. And yep, that is a lubricant. But it's not a wet or oily lubricant that you might use on something like plastic or metal. It's actually dry. Well, really, it's not dry at first, but after you spray it on a surface, in a matter of seconds, the acetone carrier flashes off and you're left with a nice thin lubricating film. Kind of looks like thin icing. Just don't lick it. And you can spray this stuff on just about any cutting tool. I just spray it on, let it dry, and then if there's any excess, I wipe it back. Well, let's take a quick step back and talk about why we would want to lubricate a cutting tool in the first place. Anytime a cutting edge moves through material, there's friction, and usually lots of it. As you probably already know, friction generates heat, and excessive heat can dull the cutting edge, shortening its lifespan. And since we're talking about wood here, all that extra heat and friction can actually burn the wood, which isn't ideal unless you're practicing Shosugiban, Japanese wood burning. So the goal of lubrication is to reduce friction, keep the tool running cooler, and hopefully extend the life so that it just cuts clean for a longer period of time. And I don't know if you noticed, but things just aren't getting cheaper these days, so I want my tools to last as long as possible. Now I know some of you are thinking, hey, I've got some lubricant, can't I just spray this stuff on there and call it a day? Well, I wouldn't. Unlike plastic or metal, wood is porous, and it readily absorbs any liquid it comes into contact with. So when you're cutting or drilling with an oily tool, the wood dust tends to clump up, and it can make a nasty paste that clogs the bit and does exactly the opposite of what we want it to do. It generates more friction and heat and makes the cut quality suffer. It also tends to stain the wood around the cut, which can be a real problem later when it comes time to apply your finish. So in woodworking, wet lube is just more trouble than it's worth. That's why dry lubrication just makes so much more sense. The one I use is called Blade Coat. There are other dry lubricants on the market, but not all of them are designed specifically for woodworking tools. And that's a pretty important detail because anything that we cut is eventually going to get finished. So if there's something in the lubrication that causes contamination, fish eyes, or staining or something, you don't want that to end up in the finished product. I mean, finishing already, especially talking to a lot of you, I know it's not your favorite part of woodworking. It's hard enough as it is. We don't need anything making it even harder. And thankfully, Blade Coat says it doesn't cause staining, and I gotta tell you, in all the years that I've been using it, I've never seen any evidence that it does, so I believe them. I use dry lube on drill bits, router bits, table saw blades, bandsaw blades. Pretty much any power tool blade in the shop gets hit with this stuff. Now, going back specifically to Eric's question, in the book press video, I was drilling some really deep mortises to just hog out the material before going to my router. And a big Forstner bit like that can heat up pretty quickly with holes that deep. The chips you create also have a tendency to get caught up, so keeping the bit lubricated is the best defense against burning and premature dulling of the tool. Of course, vacuuming out the chips as you go is helpful too. So dry lube, highly recommended for all of your cutting tools in the shop. Thanks for your question, Eric. Next up, Ron from YouTube asks, hang on, I try not to make a fuss about people's screen names. Rigid Ron? Look, I'm gonna assume it just means that he's very set in his ways. Anyway, do you have a favorite between a regular pencil, carpenter pencil, and marking knife? All right, let's be real. It's just a pencil, right? But if you follow this channel and you've hit subscribe and you click that notification bell in hopes that YouTube will let you know whenever I make a video, but it probably won't because that's how the algorithm works anymore, then you're as much of a woodworking geek as I am, and you know that pencils are incredibly important. I really see it as like 3 different categories. You've got your rough, your medium, and your fine. And it's never just a pencil. Honestly, it's less about having a favorite and more about having the right tool for the job. For rough marking, I like Pica pencils. The lead is nice and thick, it holds up well to abuse, and it won't snap every time you drag it across a rough board. I actually keep 2 around, one with regular lead and one with white lead so that I can easily see my marks on darker woods. Now, you asked specifically about carpenter's pencils, and honestly, I don't have a whole lot of use for these in my shop, but I do tend to get them for free because companies like to put their names on them. I just don't find a whole lot of use for them outside of this rough category. Certainly could use them for rough marking, but I'm definitely not going to use these things for any kind of joinery or detailed work. For the medium category, I like a 0.7mm mechanical pencil. This is where I want a little bit more precision and a little more consistency, and that's exactly what a mechanical pencil gives you. But I also want something that feels good when writing on paper, so the lead can't be too fragile. 0.7 gives you a nice balance. It's precise enough for most layout work on smooth stock, but sturdy enough that I'm not breaking lead every 5 seconds. It's also the size that works well with measuring tools that have pre-milled marking holes, which is a real nice bonus. The 0.7 mechanical pencil is really what I would consider the all-rounder in the shop. And while any mechanical pencil will do the job, my favorite are these Graph Gear 1000s. They're super well made, and they've got a retractable tip that keeps the lead safe when you're not using it. Now for the fine category, I like a 0.5mm mechanical pencil or a marking knife, and this is where the details really start to matter. The 0.5mm pencil gives you a nice fine line, which is exactly what you need when precision is a top priority. But of course, the trade-off is that the lead is as fragile as a YouTuber's ego. So you need a light touch, and you don't want to extend the lead too far. And then there's the marking knife, a finer line you'll never make. I remember taking a class with the great William Ing, and there was one day when he told us, if you want to make good joinery, use a pencil. If you want to make great joinery, use a knife. Now, I'm pretty sure he was just repeating something he heard from someone else, but that's how it works in woodworking, and I attribute it to him. A knife gives you an incredibly fine, accurate line, but it also does something that a pencil can't do. It severs the wood fibers. That means the line can help guide your saw or your chisel, and it can also help reduce tear out on the cut. So it's not just a marking tool, it's actually part of the cutting process. But there are downsides. First, it's not very forgiving. You can't just flip the knife over and erase your mistakes. Once you knife a line in, it's pretty much there for good. Second, those lines can sometimes be a little bit hard to see. If you don't have great vision or good lighting in your shop, you might struggle to see the line.
Can't see the line, can you, Russ?
So knives are incredibly useful, but they're not going to be useful for everybody in every situation. Now you may notice I didn't say anything about regular traditional pencils. Well, I use them all the time in the shop because they're cheap and I don't mind if a few of them disappear because they got eaten by some shop gremlins. But the problem with these guys is consistency. At any given time, they could be in any one of the 3 categories depending on how much they've been used or how well they've been sharpened. Freshly sharpened, they're fine enough for precision layout. 30 seconds later, it's good for rough marking. A minute later, it's a crayon. So of course, you can use regular pencils for fine woodworking, just know the state of the tip. Sounds like a t-shirt idea. So to sum up, Pica pencils for rough work, 0.7mm mechanical for low stakes layout and writing, and 0.5mm mechanical or a knife when precision really matters. And if you want a little bit more information on this kind of measuring and marking stuff and my choices in writing utensils, I've got a video out there that's one of those buy this, not that measuring and marking edition that you might want to check out. I'll put the link in the description. Oh, and thanks for the question, Ron. Keep it rigid. So you guys know that I love answering your woodworking questions, but sometimes there's really nothing better than talking to someone in person, and that's where your local Woodcraft store comes in. Just go to Woodcraft's store locator to find your local store. Whether you're stuck on joinery, finishes, or tool choices, you could walk in and get real hands-on advice. Even better, most locations host classes, demos, and events so you can keep learning and meet other woodworkers. And while you're at it, you could save 10% using our code TWW2026. Of course, exclusions apply. Thanks Woodcraft for sponsoring the show, and let's get back to our questions. Teresa on YouTube asks, how do you recommend finishing a wood piece that'll be outside in a sunny and soupy, humid climate? Now, first of all, this sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole because she put humid in brackets, like to indicate that I might not know what soupy was. Soupy is a term that I use all the time, so I went around the shop and asked, and got a very small survey because I'm the only one here, but I wanted to find out if other people regularly refer to humidity as being like soupy. So what do you guys say? Is this a regional thing? Do you call humid weather soupy? Anyway, whether it's hot and soupy or dry and cool, Mother Nature wins the battle every time. And a lot of people think it's the moisture, it's the rain and the snow that's the problem, but in reality, the real enemy is the sun. UV exposure breaks down finishes incredibly fast. And once that finish starts to fail, that's when the moisture has its opening and things go downhill quickly. So no matter what finish you use, if the piece is left out exposed in the elements, that finish will lose the battle eventually. Some just lose the battle a little more gracefully than others. I've got a good example to show you. Back in 2020, I refinished my mahogany Adirondack chairs using an epoxy sealer followed by a marine varnish. On paper, that sounds pretty bullish bulletproof. And to be fair, when they were done, they looked fantastic. You know, the kind of finish that makes you stand back and think, I'm never going to let these babies look that bad ever again.
Sure, Jan.
The chairs then experienced a few years of high elevation sun in Denver, followed by the chaotic nonsense that Missouri calls weather, including the time that the chairs tried to float away. So let's take a little field trip outside to the parking lot, and I could show you what these chairs look like today. So here they are, my embarrassment on display for the whole neighborhood to see. This is just a question of priorities. I haven't had time to deal with this thing, and you can see plenty of peeling finish. The finish at some point just cracked, and once it cracks, it allows that moisture to infiltrate, and it just spreads until everything looks like this. Yeah, pretty embarrassing. Now the good news is these aren't too far gone. I used a rot-resistant species of wood. So even left to its own devices, these chairs would last quite a long time. Not forever, but for a long time. So all I have to do is take these back in the shop, sand them down, give them a nice new coat of finish, and they'd be good for a little while longer, depending on the finish you use. But I could tell you right now, it won't be a film finish. Now, because of my clear track record as a bad exterior furniture parent, I'm just not a good candidate for film forming finishes, and that's why these days I stick to non-film forming finishes. If there's no film, then there's nothing to peel and flake. Finishes like Osmo UV Protection Oil, Australian Timber Oil, Penafin, and even Rubio Durogrit are all good examples of finishes that absorb and seal, but don't build a film. These finishes still require upkeep, but when they start to fail, they usually do it gradually. They fade, they dry out, they lose a little color and some luster, but they don't turn into a peeling horror show. And when it's time for a little maintenance, you generally just wipe the surface down and then reapply some finish. Most times you won't even need to sand. And honestly, it's the sanding that's a big part of the reason most of us procrastinate on the maintenance on these things in the first place. Now, another thing to consider, especially in a hot and humid environment, is the presence of mold and mildew. Film finishes can often trap moisture, inviting little nasty things to grow. Non-film finishes, on the other hand, let the wood breathe, and any moisture that's absorbed by the wood fibers is generally quickly released when the weather shifts. Now, that doesn't mean that film finishes are inherently bad. In fact, quite the opposite. A good quality film finish is going to look great, and it's going to be a little bit more protective than something that doesn't form a film. But the problem is, if and when it fails, it's going to fail spectacularly. And the maintenance window for a film finish is so much less forgiving. Once you miss it, it's game over. So that's why I usually say the best exterior finish is the one that you can commit to maintaining. If you're the kind of person that likes to keep an eye on your furniture and do little routine maintenance as needed to keep the finish looking perfect, then you might be a candidate for a film finish. But if you're like me and every April you go outside and you go, maybe next year, you might be a better candidate for something like a non-film forming finish. Oh, and just to complicate things, my recommendations will change if you have some kind of protection over the furniture. If it lives under a covered patio, on a screened porch, or you use furniture covers when not in use, you're playing a completely different game. In those cases, your finish has much longer maintenance intervals, and the playbook opens up considerably. And once again, I've got a video that you might want to check out on this very topic, showing a bunch of projects that I finished over the years with various different finishes and how they held up over time. And it's titled All Exterior Finishes Fail. How's that for some optimism? Anyway, thanks for your question, Teresa. Next up, we have Sanyashova from YouTube. He says, what's the advantage of square dog holes versus round? I like the aesthetic of square dogs, but I feel that round dogs might be more versatile. Well, in a nutshell, round dog holes are easier to make, easier to add to an existing bench, and they open up a whole world of accessories that are designed around a 3/4 inch hole. A square dog hole, on the other hand, does pretty much one thing. It holds a square dog. But let's unpack this a little bit. First, if you're not familiar with the term, a dog is one of the little work holding devices that we use on a workbench to keep a board from sliding around. Typically, one dog lives in the movable jaw of a vise, and the other sits in the bench top. You raise them up, pinch the work between them, and now the board stays put while you plane, scrape, sand, or whatever else you need to do. Traditionally, dog holes were square, and the dogs themselves were usually just little wooden blocks. You can see that mine have an additional wood strip that acts as a spring and helps keep the dog at whatever height I want. The face of the dog is wide and flat and provides a nice registration for the workpiece. There's really an elegant simplicity to it, but it's also a real pain in the neck to build. If you want square dogs in a bench, you generally need to plan for that from the beginning. That square dog strip is usually built right into the top and not the kind of thing that you can casually decide to add later because you changed your mind. Now let's compare that to round dog holes. Round dog holes are pretty simple. You just drill some 3/4 inch holes in your bench, and you're good to go. That means you can add them well after the bench is built, and you can add them anywhere you want in whatever pattern you want. And while you absolutely can make your own round dogs from 3/4 inch dowel stock, a lot of folks just buy them. You can find them in plastic, brass, aluminum, steel, whatever flavor of bench candy makes you happy. And beyond the dogs themselves, the 3/4 inch hole standard has kind of become its own workshop ecosystem. There are clamps, holdfasts, stops, specialty fixtures, and enough accessories to make you feel like your workbench is a modern modular work center. And if you're into 3D printing, forget about it. There are endless doodads that you can print off and expand the functionality of your workbench. Also, because the holes are round, all the accessories can rotate freely, which is nice for any weird clamping situation you might find yourself in. So at this point, round dog holes kind of sound like the clear winner, but there are a few other things to consider. First, drilling holes sounds easy, and it kind of is, right up until you realize how tricky it can be to drill perfectly perpendicular through a 3 to 5 inch bench top. To do it, you really need the right kind of boring bit, and ideally some sort of contraption to hold your drill straight. Best case scenario, you do the drilling at the drill press during the construction of the top, but obviously that's not always possible. Second, we already talked about the world of round dog hole accessories that you can buy, but some people don't really have a need for that. I'm kind of one of them. The only round accessory that I use at my workbench is a holdfast. So my dogs are just dogs, and they really don't need to be anything else. Third, and this is admittedly a little bit irrational, I just like the look and feel of traditional dogs. There's just something, I don't know, cool about it. I might be romanticizing woodworking here, but the aesthetic, the feel, the way that they function, I just like it. And I can even do this with them. Boink! Now there's one more point that's easily overlooked, and that's just because you build a workbench with square dogs doesn't mean you can't actually use 3/4 inch dog hole accessories. Think about it. I can add 3/4 inch holes wherever I want if I need to. It just depends on how much I want to turn my bench top into Swiss cheese. So ultimately, this comes down to personal preference. But if I'm giving advice to most people in most situations, I would say that round dog holes probably make the most sense. They're just easier to make, and you can find all kinds of stuff for them. And thanks for the question, Sanyashova. All right, so that's gonna do it for us today. Now, remember, all these questions generally come from two places, on YouTube and Patreon. So if you're a supporter of the show in either of those places, look for my weekly call for questions. I'll answer the questions right then and there, but I'll also pull some of those questions for this show. So thank you to everybody who has supported us there. Also, I wanna mention, if you are on those platforms, we do extra videos there, not this sort of long form video, but I do short form videos called Grain of Truth, where I talk about behind the scenes stuff, things that don't normally make it into regular videos that I think a lot of you would find fun and interesting. And no matter what level you subscribe at, either here on YouTube or Patreon, you get access to those. Anyway, truly appreciate your support. Thank you so much for sending in the questions, everybody. We'll see you next time. For rough marking, I like Pika pencils. I shouldn't do that. That's stupid. Try it again. It's taking a long time to say that. To most woodworkers in most situations, wet lube is just more trouble than it's worth. That's why for my cutting tools, I use dry lubrication. It's like a deodorant commercial. And play tic-tac-toe.